program this evening is DXing on the satellites. And we welcome our speaker, Sean Kutzko, KX9X. Sean lived in Connecticut. He worked for the ARRL. He was contest branch manager and media and public relations manager. And he's recently relocated to Urbana, Illinois. And he's now currently he's doing blogs on satellite and portable operating topics for DX Engineering's on all bands. So, Sean, if you want to go ahead with your program and go into presentation mode, please go ahead.
Very good. Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me here on the club. Thanks to Kevin for asking me to present tonight, and also it's good to see Gary W9XT. How you doing, Gary? It's been a while since I've bumped into you. Let me share my screen here. Bear with me for just a moment. There. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
You can? Good. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, so what we're going to be talking about tonight is using the satellites to try to work some DX. These are going to be a lot of skills that you already use on the HF and VHF bands. So it's using skills on a different frontier. This presentation is really just designed to get you to think about some stuff. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm just going to show you what is possible using a mode of ham radio that you may not have used before or haven't used in quite a while. So I'll have plenty of time for questions later on. If you have any, by all means, if something catches your eye and you got a question while we're going through the presentation, just let me know and I'll be happy to answer you then. So what we're going to be talking about is we're going to go over what it's like in the world of ham radio satellites today, as opposed to what it was, say, 15, 20 years ago. We're going to talk about going towards DXCC on satellite, and yes, it is possible even with the current satellite environment. We'll talk about some of the gear that you need in order to get started, what some of the major obstacles are to success, and I've got a success story for you of somebody who's actually pulled this off in recent years using only the current low Earth orbit satellites. And we'll also talk about ways that you can help yourself and others contribute to getting some good DX on the satellites. So many of you might remember using satellites back in the day when some of the higher Earth orbit satellites were around. AO10 and AO13 in particular were very popular for DXers using those satellites. You know, back then when you had a high Earth orbit satellite, DXCC was quite easy, I would say, even as recently as 2003. You had satellites with a large coverage area, sometimes as much as 15 or 16,000 kilometers, and they were always above the horizon for a long period of time. That all kind of came to an end with the demise of AO40 or Phase 3E. That was the last true high Earth orbit satellite that was launched here in the States, and that failed back in January of 2004. Some of you might remember reading about that in QST at the time. Work continues as we speak on trying to get another satellite into high Earth orbit that would allow those types of contacts to come back to the satellite world again, but that costs a lot of money, and the powers that be are doing everything they can to try to raise that kind of money and solicit other partner agencies that might be willing to cut us a break on a launch. But obviously getting into space is a pretty high demand, so they're doing everything they can, but it is a very slow and painstaking process to try to get a launch like that. The Qataris launched a satellite in 2018 called QO100, which uses the microwave bands, and it has a great orbit and a huge range, but it doesn't cover North America. So unfortunately, we in the States and Canada are still sitting on the sidelines for a good high Earth orbit satellite. So what does that leave us with then? Well, as I said earlier, almost all of the satellites that are currently in orbit, and there are about 24 of them, they're all low Earth orbit. And that means they're about 500 or 600 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. They have very small footprints. They're only about a third to half the size of some of the higher orbit satellites that existed a few years ago. And because they're low Earth orbit, they only stay visible above your horizon for about 15, maybe 20 minutes at a time maximum. The two current satellites that have the longest range capabilities as of now are the venerable AO7, which was launched in 1974 and is still hanging on with a wing and a prayer up there after so many decades in space. And there was a satellite launched a few years ago called RS-44, which is a very good distance satellite as well. So if you're interested in DXing, those two satellites are the ones that are in use primarily for long haul contacts. So is DXCC actually possible using these low Earth orbit satellites as compared to the higher Earth orbit satellites of years ago? And it most certainly is. It is not an easy thing to pull off, but it is mathematically possible to do it. And I will show you exactly how that can be achieved and what you can work using these simple low Earth orbit satellites. And DXCC is attainable, but it will take a concerted effort for you to get it. So what exactly can you work? Well, the two major satellites that are out there they use either FM or linear. And linear satellites use sideband and CW, and they have a transponder on board that provides anywhere from 20 to 60 kilohertz of bandwidth. And you tune across it just like you would tune across 20 meters or any other HF band. Multiple contacts can take place on the linear satellites simultaneously, whereas an FM satellite is pretty much like an orbiting repeater. Only one person can access the satellite at any given point in time. If you look at the distance records for the two farthest range FM satellites, you're looking at AO27 with about 5,900 kilometers and SO50, which has been up for quite a while as well, and that's in the neighborhood of 5,500 kilometers. F4DXV in France has worked to the New England area on those two FM satellites and currently holds the distance record for both of those common FM satellites. When you get into the linear satellites, we're getting back into AO7 and RS-44, like I just talked about a moment ago. And F4DXV is once again the station furthest east in the distance equations on the linear satellites. You're looking upwards of 8,000 kilometers on both of those satellites. One went all the way from France out to Idaho, and the station in Idaho on the other end of that was the person you see in that photo on the left, Casey, KI7UNJ. He uses a handheld dual band Yagi antenna for 2 meters and 70 centimeters, but he always takes his gear up to a high mountaintop and has the ability to hear satellites just a degree or two below his horizon, which is a huge advantage when you're going for a distance record like that. So Casey is well known for attempting distance records and working DX on the low Earth orbit satellites. So with those limitations, working with those distances, what can you actually work from Madison, Wisconsin? Well, this map demonstrates the difference between using an FM satellite versus a linear satellite. If you look at the curve there, that curve represents the first curve represents 5,500 kilometers, which is pretty much at the extreme end of the current FM satellites in orbit. So you can work your way all the way down to South America and cover most of the Caribbean. Europe, you're looking at just the most westerly portions of Europe getting in on the FM satellites. But if you switch over to the linear satellites, that opens up a whole layer of Europe that you can't get on the FM satellites, and also reaches you much further into South America, and also gets you a little bit into Oceania, not too much into Asia though. UA9 is the only the only country within Madison that you can reach from the Asian continent on the linear satellites. So what does that actually add up to? Well, if you look at the northwestern tip of Africa, you can actually communicate with 17 different DXCC countries on the current low Earth orbit satellites, everywhere from Mali, Morocco, Equatorial Guinea, even Annobon Island, if you can get somebody to go there and have satellite gear with them. So 17 DXCC countries in the northwestern corner of Africa are reachable from Madison, Wisconsin via the current satellites. As I mentioned, there's just not a whole lot within range further out to the west. Only 6 DXCCs can make it from Madison, UA9, Asiatic Russia, and then some of the islands out further in Oceania. Nothing much past Johnston and Midway, however. Europe is a very pleasant surprise. You can actually hit 56 different DXCC entities on the European continent, including a fair amount of Eastern Europe from Madison. I've got all of this information in a spreadsheet I'd be happy to share with you after the fact if you like. I'll dump that into the chat after my talk is over. But there's quite a few Eastern Europeans getting down towards Corsica and Italy as well that are reachable from central Wisconsin. North America is another nice surprise too. If you consider most of the countries in the Caribbean are considered the North American continent, you've got access to 50 DXCC entities within that continent as well, including some pretty nice surprises. All of these are well within range of the FM satellites as well. So you have plenty of opportunity to work a fair amount of countries in North America. South America is a nice surprise as well. Over 20 DXCC entities are within range from Madison via satellites, and a large chunk of those are reachable with the FM satellites as well. So the FM satellites, you can use a dual band handheld antenna on 2 meters and 70 centimeters and a dual band HT. And if you time it right, you can actually work all the way down into northern South America on the FM birds. But if you go to the linears, that opens up a different layer as well, and you can reach as far down as Chile and Paraguay from Madison. So if you add all of that up, you're looking at 154 different DXCC entities that are within range of Madison. Those are 154 entities that are mathematically possible to work via satellite. Well, what do I mean by mathematically possible? So that just means that these are the satellite and these are the DXCC entities that are within range of you in Madison. There are some significant obstacles to actually communicating with them. The biggest one, of course, is the lack of hams in some of these rarer entities that are only going to be activated if there's a de-expedition to them. But the more common issue is finding hams in these locations that are active on HF, but they're not active on VHF or satellite. And many countries that are extremely common in the Caribbean or South America on the HF bands are quite rare indeed on the satellites. Jamaica is a real good example of that. Bonaire, Curacao. These, you hear these countries on HF almost every single day, but there are a lot of stations that are active on the satellites that are still looking for a QSO with some of these very common Caribbean entities. And the satellite community is constantly reaching out to active ham radio operators in these areas, as well as stations that are considering de-expeditions, whether de-expedition to a very rare DXCC entity or contesters that are going to go down to the Caribbean for, say, CQ Worldwide or ARRLDX or something like that. The satellite community is constantly doing outreach to get satellite gear in the hands of somebody who's going to be going down to some of these islands or countries in Central and South America. As an example of some really good DX, this is a photo of the QSL card I got for working K1N Navassa Island back in 2015. They were able to make 29 QSOs via a satellite that is no longer functioning, the FO29 satellite, and they only used a single Yaesu 817 all-band QRP radio and a handheld dual band Yagi called the Arrow antenna, which is 3 elements on 2 meters and 7 elements on 70 centimeters. And they did 2 satellite passes and made 30 contacts. And Made a lot of satellite operators very happy with that one, including myself. That's probably the best DX contact I've had on the satellites. So what kind of equipment do you need to work satellites? Well, you might be surprised that you have some of this already lying around in your shack. Certainly you need the capability of being able to transmit and receive on 2 meters and 70 centimeters. That's what the vast majority of satellites use these days. You need to have a good set of Yagis, preferably a circularly polarized Yagi that will help eliminate some of the fading that you will experience as the satellite antenna is constantly changing position as the satellite tumbles through space. A mast-mounted preamp is a particularly good idea, especially on 70 centimeters, so you can hear a little bit better on 70 centimeters. Most of the time, a good azimuth elevation antenna rotator is going to be very helpful to keep your antennas tracking the satellite as it passes over the sky. However, in some situations, you may not need that as-L antenna rotor, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Obviously, you're going to need a tracking program. You need to know when the satellite is going to be passing overhead, so you can get on and try to work stations on the satellites. You definitely need a very good view of the horizon. Most of the good long-haul DX contacts are going to be occurring at the absolute outermost limit of the satellite's footprint. So you're going to be trying to stretch the capabilities of your station and the satellite as far as you possibly can. So you're going to be looking right at the horizon. So you want to make sure that you're up on a hill, or your antennas are on a good tower with a good view of the horizon and no obstructions. That's going to be a big plus for you. You need to make sure that you understand how the Doppler effect works, because as the satellite is passing overhead, the frequencies, especially the 70 centimeter frequencies, are going to constantly shift as the satellite is passing overhead. So you need to be able to compensate for that. Some satellite tracking programs can interface with modern radios and do very good automatic compensation for the Doppler shift, but it's not 100%. And in some cases, if you're going to be working right at the limits of a satellite's footprint, you may only have 30 seconds or a minute in order to complete that contact. So you want to make sure that you understand how the Doppler effect is going to line up your frequency, your transmit and receive frequencies right at the beginning and end of a pass, because you don't have much time to mess around and try to dial that in. A Twitter account will be very helpful for your success in going for DXCC on satellite. Most of the very active satellite operators frequent Twitter, and they constantly post about their activities. If they're going to be going on an expedition anywhere, lots of good camaraderie, good tips and tricks, and lots of support for newer satellite operators, especially ones that are trying to work a lot of grid squares, or ones that are really stretching the limits of the satellite's capabilities by trying to get DXCC and going for the really long haul contacts. And finally, you're going to need a good amount of patience. There are going to be times where you're not going to be able to hear the station you're trying to work. It might take some time to set up some schedules to get some of the ones that are right on the outer limits of your distance capabilities. It's going to take some work, and it's going to take some time and perseverance. So if you're not a patient person, this may not be the pursuit for you. The photo that I've chosen up here is from the 2016 CY9C expedition to St. Paul Island. And this is a very good set of antennas that you can use. This is known as the LEO Sat Pack, manufactured by M Squared. And it's 2 circularly polarized antennas. I think one is 5 or 6 elements on 2 meters, and the other is 8 or 9 elements on 70 centimeters. And they work quite well for reaching into the LEO satellites. And if you're setting this up at a fixed location, up on a tower pretty good, you will do very, very well with these antennas. And of course, portable gear also works as well. I've made about 30 DXCC contacts using my portable station, which is a couple of Yaesu FT817s in a camera bag that I sling over the front of my chest, and once again using the Arrow satellite antenna, which is 3 elements on 2 meters and 7 elements on 70 centimeters. Most of the contacts that I've made are fairly run-of-the-mill as far as HF would be concerned, but I'm particularly happy with a ham who went to a couple of the ones in Scandinavia, such as the Faroe Islands and Norway as well. So there are hams who go on expeditions while they're going on holidays or vacations with their family, and even using portable gear, you can work some pretty good DX with a portable setup. And I'm only running 5 watts here, so it's not like you need big power in order to work long haul DX on the satellites. One of the big success stories as of late is a gentleman by the name of Chris Terran, NK1K. He lives in Massachusetts now, but he actually went to grad school here at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I got to know him pretty well in the 1990s when he was here for grad school. Since he moved back out to Essex, Massachusetts, he has worked 104 DXCC countries, all on the low Earth orbit satellites, including a couple of satellites that don't function anymore, particularly the FO-29 satellite, which was a very good satellite. Yes, he is much closer to Europe than we are here in the Midwest, but his QTH has got a very poor horizon to the Caribbean and Central and South America. And if you recall the numbers that I showed you earlier in my presentation, that makes about 50 or 60 different DXCC countries in the Caribbean and South America that he had a much harder time with than most of us do here in the Midwest. So to complete 100 countries from where he's located requires significant effort, even though he had an easier shot to Europe than we do. If you'd like more information on his setup and his approach, the Twin City DX Association out of Minneapolis, St. Paul published an article on working satellite DXCC in their June 2019 newsletter. And I've got a link for it there in my presentation. But if you were to Google NK1K gray line, you would be able to find a link to that presentation. If you can't find it, just send me an email or shoot me a note on Twitter, and I'll be happy to send you a link to it. This is a listing of the countries that Chris has confirmed from his location in Massachusetts. The ones that are green are countries that he has already confirmed. The ones that are white are within his satellite footprint, within range for him, but he hasn't been able to talk to anybody or find anybody who can activate those particular countries as of yet. The red ones are countries where he has established contact with a ham in those countries and is currently working out a schedule and trying to get somebody in that country to try to work in one satellite. And that is taking a little bit of pursuit and Elmering and coaching on his part in order to make that happen. What does the future of satellites look like? Well, there's always people that are trying to build new satellites and have ham radio on them. So the landscape of satellites for the future DXCC pursuers is constantly in flux. But a couple of things are coming up that are of great significance to serious satellite operators. One is the Chinese satellite organization, CAMSAT, is getting ready to launch a couple of satellites sometime this year, which are known as CAS-5A and CAS-7A. These are very large satellites. Most of the satellites that are in orbit now are what are known as CubeSats, which are 10-centimeter cubes. This is a much larger satellite. It is a 6-unit satellite. So it's 6 of those small cubes put together as one large satellite. This satellite is going to feature a 15-meter uplink and a 10-meter downlink, which is very similar to a couple of Russian satellites that existed back in the late 90s and early 2000s called RS-12 and RS-13. So with the uptick in the solar cycle and a satellite with a 15-meter uplink, that raises some very interesting possibilities of HF propagation combining with satellite communications. So it will be very interesting to have these satellites in orbit, hopefully later this year, assuming that there are no delays. If you'd like more information on this, you can check out the organization, the European organization called NanoSats, and they have complete technical information on these particular satellites. I'm really looking forward to having these two up and running with a 15-meter uplink. Another consideration is the AMSAT Golf program. AMSAT, of course, is the Radio Amateur Satellite Corporation here in the United States. And their golf program is their latest program that they have, and it stands for Greater Orbit, Larger Footprint. The basic plan of the golf program is to build on their most recent program, which was called the Fox program, in developing new technologies that they can install in the next generation of satellites, and taking the lessons that they've learned over time and constantly improving on the technology that goes into medium Earth orbit and ultimately a high Earth orbit satellite, which is that's their ultimate goal, is to have high Earth orbit satellites similar to the old AO40 or Phase 3D satellite. It's going to be several years down the road before they actually hit that, but it's a very ambitious goal, and the volunteer engineering staff is doing excellent work in moving forward on this. They're constantly devoting time, energy, and effort into making this happen. So if you'd like to learn more, you can go to AMSAT's website and just do a search on their website for the golf program, and they've got a very comprehensive write-up of what they're trying to do with the golf program in the future. So in summary, I just wanted to remind everybody that, DXCC is not going to be an easy thing to accomplish on satellite. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's going to be a piece of cake, but it is a worthy challenge for active hams who have a desire to try to push the limits of their station a little bit. And certainly the future developments in satellite technology, like I was just talking about, are going to make DX contacts much more common on satellites. And lastly, ways you can help. If you are somebody who enjoys transmitting from the Caribbean or South America or Europe, you're going on a DXpedition for a contest, or you're going on vacation with your family, please consider taking some satellite gear. As I said, many of these entities that are extremely common on HF are quite rare on the satellites, and you would be a very popular person indeed if you just considered shifting your audience for your ham radio transmissions from HF to satellites. K0FFY took his small satellite station with him on a family vacation to Iceland in 2019, and he said he had the time of his life being on the other side of the pileup like that. So that's really the end of the presentation here. I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you may have. I am at your disposal.
Sean, that was a first-rate presentation. I learned a lot here. And we DXers, we're always looking for a new challenge, and maybe some of us have found one here. I mean, the really neat thing about it is it doesn't take a whole lot, in terms of equipment and expense to get into this. So that's very encouraging. Anyway, let's open this up to some discussion and some questions. So go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Sean. This is Mike, WB8BZK. You mentioned that you were running about 5 watts. Is that typical, or do people run higher power, or what is, obviously 5 watts is what is needed, but what's typical?
There are plenty of operators out there running 5 watts or less. In some cases, they're running even less than that. You need to be careful with the satellites for your effective radiated power. 5 watts with a 30 element Yagi on 432 is going to add up to a significant amount of gain. In some cases, especially with the Oscar 7 satellite that I mentioned, it's been around for coming up on 45, 50 years, and it's pretty beat up at this point. It's pretty fragile. And there are instances where people transmit with too much power into Oscar 7, and it can actually overload the satellite, and it flips modes from 2 meters and 70 centimeters to its backup mode, which is 2 meters and 10 meters. And that happens, unfortunately, all too often. And it ruins a pass for people, obviously, when you're trying to transmit into a satellite and somebody just overloads it with too much power, and it basically shuts the satellite into the other mode, killing that particular pass. There are people who run more power than 5 watts, but the messaging that we're trying to get out within the satellite community is you really don't need more than that. If you've got a good gain antenna, and the handheld dual band Yagi that I use provides maybe 8 dB gain on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, maybe a little bit more on 70, but 5 watts and 8 dB gain is plenty to get into most of the satellites that are up there right now. As an example, I used that very setup when I was in Wyoming in 2017, and I made contact with Echo Bravo 1 Alpha Oscar in the west coast of Spain, which was about 7,500 kilometers. So Wyoming to Spain with 5 watts and a handheld antenna.
Thank you. That's great.
John, tell me something about the Chinese satellite with the 10 and 15. What kind of modes is it going to handle, or do we know yet?
It'll be sideband and CW.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Sean, this is
presentation, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sean. This is Michael Seidman, AA60Y. Nice
Hey.
presentation. Thank you. What are your 4 favorite satellites that you use?
The 4 favorite satellites that I use are the next 4 satellites that are going to be above my horizon. I use every single satellite that I have capability to access. I've got a very modest station here at home. I've got a 9700 from ICOM that I use on the satellites that I just picked up, but my antennas are very, very small. In all honesty, it's very difficult for me to pursue DXCC with the antennas that I currently have. My current focus on the satellites is pursuing an award called the Gridmaster Award, which is confirming contact with all 488 grid squares in the continental United States. That's where I'm focusing my effort right now. Once, hopefully within a couple of years, I'll be able to move to a different location, and I'll be able to put a tower up again and get some better satellites. And at that point, I have every intention of pursuing DXCC on the satellites and possibly EME as well.
Well, thanks. That was great. I appreciate it a lot.
Sure.
Sean, I worked you a few times. I think I gave you my EN29 for your
Thank
grid
you
map.
for that grid. You're the only person I've ever heard in that grid. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm the last Mohican up here right now. Anyhow, yeah, I got you looking at your log. I got you portable all the way down the line there. Your opinion of working full duplex, or at least for the linears, is that a must do, or what's your thoughts on that?
I would say that unless you are one of the most skilled satellite operators on the planet, that you need to have full duplex capability. In case you don't know, full duplex means you can hear your own signal through the satellite's downlink as you are transmitting in real time. Because you're dealing with 2 VFOs, one on 2 meters and one on 70 centimeters, and you're dealing with the Doppler shift, being able to hear your own signal through the downlink in real time is pretty much a must-have for the linear satellites. There are a couple of incredible satellite operators that I know that can do it without being able to hear their satellite on the downlink. But they're like the gurus of satellite operating, and I'm nowhere near that level. So the standard recommendation is if you're just getting started in satellites, you need to be able to hear your own signal on the downlink, if for no other reason than to know that you're actually making it into the system. So full duplex is all but necessary for the linear satellites.
Sean, I wonder if you know Walter W5WH, Houston?
I do not know that call. I'm sorry.
Well, he's kind of our lead guy here in Houston. He has a computer that announces the next rising satellite, automatically puts his Azel on the bird, and puts his radio on channel.
Mm-hmm.
He has a Zoom page that's almost always up, and it's kind of interesting talking to him and hear a voice in the background say so and so is rising, and he goes and talks to it a while, and it's just almost no effort. All the effort went into managing the system.
Yes, I would guess, I'm making an educated guess here, that he is using a program for Windows PCs called SatPC32, which is
I've heard that.
Okay, it's available through the AMSAT website. And it is the gold standard for computer integration with satellite operators. It connects to your radio. It automatically adjusts for Doppler. It does a pretty good job. Like I said, it's not 100%, but it does a pretty good job of getting you in the ballpark. And you know, it automatically controls your rotators. It tells you when the satellites are going to be up. It's a great operating aid for the Sirius satellite operator. And if you're a Mac user, there's a
talk and listen.
I'm sorry, we doubled. What?
I say all you have to do is sit there and talk and listen.
Pretty much.
The computer finds it all for you.
Right.
I don't know if there's any fun in that or not.
You know, it's interesting that you say that. I have Sat PC32 installed, and I still do everything manually because I've been DXing for 30 some odd years. I'm still used to turning the dials and messing with the BFOs. I like doing that. So I don't have the automated stuff hooked up to my laptop for that stuff yet. By the way, if you're a Mac user, there's a program called Mac Doppler that will do all of the things that I just described for Sat PC32 as well.
I have a question regarding Doppler.
I'm sorry?
I have a question regarding Doppler. This is Thomas
Sure.
AC9BJ.
Hi.
When you're adjusting your Doppler, are you adjusting so that the frequency intended is the frequency as perceived by the bird? So you'd have the tuning below on approach and above on departure, and receiving above and below, and the opposite?
Basically, yes, that's correct. I mean, I'm sitting here having to do the math in my head as I'm talking to you about this. Some satellites have a 70 centimeter uplink, and some satellites have a 70 centimeter downlink. So depending on whether 70 centimeters is the uplink or the downlink band, you will adjust. You will tune above the frequency, above the main frequency to below the main frequency, or you will tune below the main frequency to above the frequency. I believe, give me a second here. I believe if you are transmitting on 70 centimeters, you start below the main frequency, and as the satellite passes overhead, you will tune up the spectrum in order to compensate for that. If you're listening on 70 centimeters, you will start above the main frequency, and as the satellite passes, by the end of the pass, you will be below the main frequency. In theory, the published downlink frequency will be absolutely correct when the satellite is midpoint of the pass. Does that make sense?
Make it stand still for a moment.
That'd be great if we could do that. I'd like to make it stand still for about 6 hours a day. That would be awesome.
Don't they have a geostationary one over in the Mediterranean somewhere?
That's the QO100 satellite that I mentioned in my presentation, and it's very, very popular there. It uses the microwave bands for uplink and downlink, but unfortunately, it doesn't reach to us here in the United States and Canada. So we got to sit on the sidelines while everybody else has the fun.
Sean, speaking of DX and satellites, are you familiar with maybe a satellite that is orbiting the moon?
It's not something that I followed terribly closely. I know that I believe it was the Chinese that were working on trying to do that, but I don't know what the outcome of that was. I'd have to jump on Google and do my homework.
Okay. I think it's available and you can take pictures and then it'll send you the picture. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
It would be great if they could get one with a 100-watt transponder up there orbiting the moon. That would be a lot of fun.
I understand this next voyage that NASA's going to take will include a ham repeater.
Oh, that'd be great.
Of course, you'll have to wait for it to rotate in and out of view. It may be good some days and not good other days.
I'll happily wait.
Those that don't know, Sean just completed a series of 5 or 6 YouTube videos on operating the satellites, and I really suggest you check them out. They're on YouTube. How to operate. He's got actual QSOs. You can see how it's done. I think your last one was with Ward and 0AX and setting up a simple station antenna system for the satellites. I'd really recommend people check those out. They're really excellent.
Thanks for the plug, Gary. Yeah, those videos are available on the DX Engineering YouTube channel, and it's a series of 6 videos that takes you from knowing absolutely nothing about satellite operating to going all the way through FMs and linear satellites, and even a very nice pastime roving, where you take portable gear and you transmit from different grid squares out in the continental US, or anywhere that you may want to travel. Thanks, Gary. Yeah, I recommend that if you're really curious about satellite operating, that you watch those videos on the DX Engineering YouTube channel.
I got a question. I got a
There you go.
FM1.
Mhm.
Is there a kit to add 2 meters onto this?
You'd need to talk to Aero Antenna and see if they have an adapter kit for that. I would bet that they do. I can't imagine that they would use a boom that didn't accommodate the 2-meter elements as well. If you go to I believe it's aeroantenna.com, just fire them a note. They're really, really responsive. They're a great company.
Yeah, I got this as a trade with someone else. I traded it, and I put it together. I never used it, so it's been here for a couple of years.
If you can get the 2-meter, the 3 elements for 2 meters, you've got a great antenna. There are a lot of operators that use that antenna and have done wonders with it.
You mount it on a little tripod or mast or something, couldn't you?
You could. If you're doing a home operation, then you could certainly set it up on a tripod. I know that people who use that antenna for portable satellite operations prefer to hold it because it's easier for them to adjust the polarization of the receive frequency, that whether it's 2 meters or 70 centimeters, because as the satellites are passing overhead, they're not staying in one plane. So the antennas of the satellites are constantly moving around, and so you get a lot of what is called polarization fading on the satellites. If you've got a fixed antenna, either fixed horizontal or fixed vertical,
Okay.
there will be deep nulls in the receive signal at times as the satellite's passing overhead. So the hams who use that antenna for portable operations prefer to hold it in their hand because they can quickly adjust for that. The other way around that is to get the circularly polarized antennas that I mentioned in my presentation. And you take a 3 dB hit, but you don't have to worry about fading so much.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Sean, that was a wealth of information, both in your presentation and in the discussion. I really, really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining us. It's a real honor to have you.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. And like I said, if anybody has any questions whatsoever, you can reach out to me on email, KX9X@yahoo.com. You can find me on QRZ. You can find me on Twitter. Anything I can do to help if you've got questions about satellite operating, just let me know.